Someone told you to protect your peace. So you did. You removed people, you went quiet, you created distance, and then you waited for that relief that was supposed to come. For some people, it didn't. Not because they were wrong to want peace, but because they were handed one tool and told it was the only one. Cut it off. Walk away. The cleaner, the better. Distance isn't the same as peace. It never was. The people who actually protect their peace, quietly, sustainably, without losing everyone in the process, they do something different. They don't run from difficult relationships. They change how those relationships are allowed to reach them. That's not a small distinction. There are 6 specific ways this happens. Patterns that are psychologically precise, immediately recognizable, and almost never talked about in the same breath as protecting your peace. Point 1. Not every conflict means someone is toxic. There's a word that gets used a lot now, toxic, and it gets applied fast. Sometimes to a person, sometimes to a whole relationship, the moment something feels difficult or uncomfortable. The problem is that discomfort and danger are not the same thing. You've probably had a conversation with someone that left you feeling unsettled, irritated, maybe even hurt, and the immediate instinct was to categorize it. This person is bad for me. This relationship is unhealthy. I need to get away from this. But sometimes what that discomfort is actually pointing to has very little to do with them. Conflict can be a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable. That doesn't make them toxic. Not every person who challenges you is draining you. Not every difficult conversation is a warning sign. Some of them are just part of what relationships actually look like, not the curated version, the real one. The habit of labeling conflict as toxicity is psychologically costly because it ends things that didn't need to end. And it protects you from nothing, just a different version of yourself you hadn't met yet. Point 2. Some people need less access, not a dramatic ending. Here's something most people were never actually taught. Relationships don't have to be all or nothing. Either someone is fully in your life or they're gone. Either you maintain the whole relationship as it was, or you cut it off entirely. There's no third option, or so it seems. But there is, and it's quieter than either extreme. Some people aren't bad for your life. They're bad for your energy in large doses. The cousin who leaves you exhausted after 2 hours. The colleague who's fine in short bursts, but draining over lunch. The friend who means well, but somehow always makes things heavier. These people don't need to be removed. They need less access. That sounds colder than it is. What it actually means is that you've paid enough attention to know your own limits. That's not distance. That's clarity. The all or nothing binary is a false choice. And every time someone operates from that binary, they either hold on too long or let go too soon. Neither one is protecting peace. Both are just reactions. Number 3. Boundaries are more helpful than avoidance. Avoidance feels like peace. That's the problem. You stop answering as quickly. You find reasons not to be in the same room. You rearrange your schedule around someone's presence so the friction never has a chance to surface. And for a while, it works, in the sense that nothing explodes. But something quieter happens instead. The unresolved thing doesn't go away. It sits, and slowly, it becomes resentment. Not loud, just persistent. A low-level weight that accumulates over weeks, sometimes years. The relationship doesn't end dramatically. It just empties out. Avoidance is a delay. That's all it ever is. A boundary is different. A boundary is a decision. It says, this is what I will engage with, and this is what I won't. It requires a moment of clarity that avoidance is specifically designed to postpone. The reason most people choose avoidance over boundaries isn't laziness. It's that boundaries require you to know what you actually want, and to say it, at least to yourself. That's harder than it sounds, but it's also the only thing that works. Number 4. Stop explaining yourself to people who misunderstand you on purpose. You know this situation. You've lived it. A long message, carefully worded. A conversation that starts with you trying to clarify something and ends an hour later with you somehow defending your entire character. You explain your intentions. They reinterpret them. You explain again, more carefully this time. They find a new angle. And somewhere in the middle of it, you lose the thread of what you were even trying to say. Here's what's happening in that dynamic. Some misunderstanding isn't accidental. When someone consistently hears what they want to hear, regardless of what you actually said, the explanation isn't the solution. It's the fuel. Because your need to be understood becomes something they can use. Every clarification is an invitation for another round. That's not a communication problem. It's a leverage problem. The exhausting part is that the impulse to keep explaining comes from a genuinely good place. The belief that if you just find the right words, it will finally land. But some people have already decided what they think. The words aren't the variable they're waiting on. Recognizing that doesn't mean giving up on being understood. It means being precise about who you offer that to. Not every person in your life has earned that level of access to your interior. Point 5. Learn the difference between guilt and responsibility. This one sits deeper than the others. There are relationships people stay in, not because they want to, not because the relationship is working, not even because leaving feels impossible, but because leaving feels wrong, morally wrong, like a failure of character. That feeling has a name. It's guilt. And guilt is not the same as responsibility. They feel identical from the inside, which is exactly why this is so hard. Responsibility is specific and situational. It says, "This is genuinely mine to handle, and here's why." Guilt is broader and older. It says, "I feel bad, so I must be the cause, and I must fix it." A lot of the guilt people carry in relationships wasn't generated by those relationships. It was built earlier, by environments where someone else's emotional state was your problem to manage, where keeping the peace meant absorbing blame, where you learned to equate love with self-erasure. That conditioning doesn't announce itself. It just shows up as the feeling that you're abandoning someone by choosing yourself. You're not carrying a responsibility, you're carrying a pattern. Seeing the difference doesn't dissolve the feeling immediately, but it changes what the feeling means, and that changes what you do with it. Number 6. Peace often comes from accepting, not fixing. Underneath every behavior in this video, the labeling, the cutting off, the avoidance, the over-explaining, the guilt-driven staying, there is a single, very human instinct. The instinct to fix. Fix the relationship. Fix the other person. Fix the dynamic, or the communication, or the history between you. Fix yourself into someone who finally gets it right. And somewhere at the end of all that fixing, peace arrives. It almost never works that way. Because what the fixing is actually protecting against is something harder. The acceptance of what something actually is, rather than what you want it to be. Most people carry a version of their relationships in their head. A version of the friendship as it could be, or the family dynamic as it should be, or the person as they might become with enough patience. And a significant amount of energy goes into maintaining the gap between that version and the real one. Acceptance isn't giving up. It's the moment that gap closes. Not because the situation became what you wanted, but because you stopped organizing your interior around the possibility that it might. That's where the peace is. Not on the other side of one more conversation. Not after they finally understand. Not when the relationship is repaired. It's when you stop waiting for the external situation to produce the internal experience. Look at what every part of this had in common. Mislabeling conflict, binary thinking, avoidance, over-explaining, guilt-driven staying, compulsive fixing. Different behaviors, but underneath each one, the same movement. Searching for peace somewhere outside of yourself. In the other person's behavior, in their understanding, in the right distance, or the right words, or the right ending to the story. Peace kept moving because the place it was being looked for was never where it lived. These weren't bad instincts. They were human ones. They came from care and from history and from the entirely reasonable belief that if the outside could just be arranged correctly, the inside would finally settle. But the outside doesn't work that way. Peace is not what happens after everything is resolved. It's what becomes possible when you stop requiring resolution before it can begin. That was always the difference.